there is no real difference between the big, famous, rich names you look up to and you. It can seem like they are better or more enlightened, and it could be so easy when you're listening to them every day and you're filling your head with their wisdom to kind of bypass yourself, like give up your own sense of strength, that you're a source as well, because you're listening to other people who seem to have all the wisdom.
Today's guest is my dear friend and the fabulous James Deneka-Lavers, Maker's Guru. He's been developing leading lights and voices in the personal development and spiritual development industry for over 20 years. Welcome, James.
Hi, Anita. Thanks for having me.
It's been brilliant. I mean, I've known you, must be about 13 odd years now.
Yeah.
Wow. It's been brilliant. I mean, I did one of I think it was your signature course then, the Lazy Coach.
That's right. You were part of the first intake that did the Lazy Coach way.
That was brilliant. Yeah. And we've kept in touch through all these years, and it's been brilliant, James. So what is one of the most courageous things that you have done? Now, knowing a bit about your backstory, I'm sure there's several you could name, but pick one if possible.
Sure. It is a tricky one, because when I love the fact that you focus on courage, because I think courage comes in so many different forms. This isn't me buying time, by the way. I am going to answer your question.
No.
As I think about it, I think, well, there's this sort of like physical, instinctive courage, right? So I think, well, one of the most courageous things I ever did was a bungee jump. And I did Europe. At the time that I did it, it was Europe's biggest bungee jump. And going up in a crane, swaying in the breeze, with like a 500-foot drop beneath you, that really took courage and trust. The courage wasn't in the jumping. The courage was in the trusting. You know, that they had you and that the elastic would hold, all these things. So that struck me as the immediate answer, right? Like instinctively, that took a lot of courage for me to do that. But I think there's maybe a better answer, I don't know, which is, I think, to start my business.
Yes.
Because, again, that took trust. And as I think about this, why I love your focus on courage, Anita, because I find that trust and courage are sort of very close bedfellows. And starting my business meant walking away from a corporate career that was actually doing pretty well, that I knew that I had certainty in, and you know, I had structure and I had habits there and rituals, and I'd been in this career for years at the time. But I had a hunch, right? I had an inkling. I had a pull at me that I could not deny, but I had been denying, right? Like I had been saying, nah, just stay with what you know. Stay with what's safe. Stay with what's certain. Stay with what's repeatable. You know, you know, and all these kind of things. But that urging within me, that I know many of the people that I work with, almost everybody has that same spark. You know, that same voice. For some people, it's a voice. For other people, it's a physical urging. For me, it was physical. And it was this fantasy that I kept having. I had this fantasy over and over, Anita, in my head. And I was like, how much longer are you going to ignore it? How much longer are you just going to stay in your job that pays you really well, where you've got some significance? You know, how much longer are you going to do that? Or are you going to take the leap? Which metaphorically was the same thing I did with the bungee jump. Only this time it was a bigger, scarier leap. And doing that is, I think, probably where I demonstrated to myself a moment of, and it is a moment, you know, it was a moment. The build up to making that decision took years, but the decision itself was a moment. And it was sliding, just handing in my notice and going, no, this is happening. I'm doing this, So I'd say that's where I demonstrated the most courage.
Wow. And it is, like you say, it takes a lot of courage for sure. And it's having that belief that, yeah, I mean, it's all very well doing it, but then you've got to make it successful as well.
Yeah.
The finances that, from being financially in a great job to starting a business, there are some risks. And you have to take an educated risk to see you've got to work everything you can to make it happen.
Yes. Yes, you have.
Yeah. So how did your journey of self-development start?
I think when I was born into quite into a broken family. My parents split up when I was quite young.
Mm-hmm.
So from quite a young age, you become aware of there being a different dynamic, right? I know loads of people that will be watching this. I know for many of us, like the kind of the nuclear family is not a reality.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think I was aware of myself within the unit from a younger age than maybe those who have more stability. I think that when my sisters were born, strictly speaking, my half sisters, when I was 7 years old, they were very ill. My sisters were very ill when they were born. They're triplets.
Okay.
And so a lot of my parents,
wow.
right. Like, and at the time, 1982, they were the triplets that had born. They were so premature. They should have been born in February. They were born in November. And
wow.
Everyone was like, they're going to die. Like that premature, no triplets had ever sort of all survived, but they all survived. But it took a tremendous amount of my parents' focus and attention, obviously, right, on these lives. And they were in hospital for like a year, more than a year.
Wow.
And so even though me and my brother were looked after in terms of, my mum's parents, cared for us, and we were, we didn't go without.
Yes.
We did have to sort of start even then to learn to sort of look out for ourselves a little bit. And it was at that age, I would say, I sort of went inside a little bit. That's when I started to look inside, as many of us do, whether it's unfortunately for some people it's a trauma or something like that forces them to look inside. Some people it's a inspirational moment or an event or something like that. But I started to look inside back then, and then really things changed. To answer your question fully, when did my journey of self-discovery, self-exploration really, as I see it, begin? Was really around 16, 17. And I was having trouble with my confidence then, Anita. I blushed a lot, and I was skipping school. And it was during a period that here in the UK we do our A-level exams. I was just not going into school. My parents left, and I left home at 17. So I was living on my own at the time. I'm at school.
Wow. And
I've got my own little place, which is cool. I have my own place, and I was the only kid in the sixth form that had, in that age group that had their own place and all this, which was cool.
I bet.
Yeah. But I just wasn't going to school, and I was getting very introverted. I was getting very inward looking, to the point that when I would interact with real human beings, I would tend to blush horribly, like beetroot red. And that made me close down more, right? And my brother is who really got me on the self-development path. My brother, Michael, who is still my best friend in the world, he was collecting all these weird tape sets. Now, this is about 1993, 94. Personal development here in the UK wasn't what it is now back then. And so the idea that you would listen to a tape set to improve your life was weird, even back then. Not that long ago, really, right? Less than 30 years ago, or about 30 years ago. And even in that short few decades, that was weird that you would listen to tapes. But my brother was dead into it, and he would order them and import them from abroad. He's older than me, so he was already working. He was already making money, Anita, right? And he was spending it on these big boxes, these plastic boxes that would have tapes pressed into them. Anyway, I didn't know what they were, but I did know that they were helping him seem very, very confident. And that was all I wanted at the time, Anita. I just wanted to feel confident. I wanted to feel like I had my stuff together, you know. It bugged me and bugged me. So one day I went round to his flat and I begged him, basically. I said, please help me. And he handed me this massive plastic case, and on the cover there was a guy with like slicked black hair like this, right? And he had a massive cheesy grin, huge hands, and it said unlimited power on the front. And I was like, what is this? This seems like some Machiavellian manifesto. Like, I don't even know what this is. This is crazy. And he said, just listen to it. Just listen to it. So I took it back to my flat. I listened to it back to back. There were 6 tapes, you know, the old audio cassettes. There were 6 of those pressed into there, and I listened to them through the night. Like I didn't sleep. I listened to them through the night, and the things I heard and the little exercises that I did completely changed my life. Completely changed my worldview, and I was skipping all of school. I couldn't speak to anybody. It's at an age when you want to be talking to people and making friends and meeting maybe members of the opposite sex or the same sex or what, you know, anything like that. But I wasn't doing any of that because I was so shy. I was so, you know, blushing. That tape set, Anita, totally changed my world. And obviously it was by Anthony Robbins, right? The pretty now global name Anthony Robbins. He was not known in the UK really back then. It's only 30 years ago, but he wasn't really a known entity then. That started me on the path, most definitely.
I mean, I can't, like, from that to being the expert selling from the screen. So how did that journey take place then? You know, a big difference.
There is, yeah. There's a divergent path there, but the way I see it, it's absolutely obvious to me how it works because it involves Tony Robbins again, right? So he's been a huge part of my sort of destiny in all of this because. So this is 1993, 94, right? And I'm still at school. I'm still at college, you know, doing my A levels. After that, I was like, I want to listen to everything that this man has ever recorded. I want to listen to everybody. So I'd listen to him, and then I got into Wayne Dyer, and I listened to Wayne Dyer, and, you know, Stephen Covey, and Barbara DeAngelis, and Louise Hay, and I just consumed Deepak Chopra. You know, some of the oldies, but the greaties of personal development and self-help.
Definitely.
Yeah, right. And the thing was that I was changed, so I got my confidence, you know, by realizing that how I was processing the world. Really, it wasn't by doing any tricks. It was just I saw that I could easily make myself blush if, when somebody was talking to me, I went inside my head and imagined what they were really thinking about me. Like that, it was a ridiculous recipe, you know. And I just figured out, oh, right, maybe pay attention to the person who's talking to you and put your senses on the outside and pay close attention. And that changed my life. And it was so profound for me, and it made such a difference to my world back then as a 17-year-old, that I made a little promise in my head. I didn't realize at the time that I did, but I've got the old, they're somewhere around here. I've got the old diary that I used to keep back then. And in it, I wrote about how, like, I wanted to help other people feel confident and and know who they were and all this kind of thing. I even bought a diary, and at the front I was like, and this is 1990, probably 1994, end of 93, beginning of 94. And I wrote in it, this journal is by James Lavers, performance life coach, right?
Wow.
I was still at school, right? But I started this fantasy. Now, this was, for those cinephiles out there, this was the year that Jurassic Park came out, right? And Anita, there's a bit of music in Jurassic Park, forgive my singing, that goes, and it, it's this big sort of rousing orchestral piece, by John Williams. It's the Jurassic Park theme. And I would listen to that, right? I'd put the CD on and I'd listen to that over and over. And in my mind, I would imagine myself crystal clear, walking up the middle of an audience, like with an audience on both sides of me, and getting up onto a stage and turning around and like helping that audience in some way. And being smiling and being happy and inspired in some way. And I would just think that over and over and over again. And I wrote in my diary, I want to make films. I'm going to make films that change people's feelings and change people's lives. Now, this is pre-internet, or this is around the time the internet is so young it's not even a thing, right? 1999 was when Google came in, this is 93, 94, so it's still pre-internet. So I literally thought I was going to make actual feature films. That's what I thought. I thought I'm going to make feature films or TV programs that will just help change people's lives. Anyway, I always had that bubbling away, Anita, in the back of my mind, right? And then I moved to London. This was when all of this happened. I lived in a little backwater city in the east of the UK called Norwich. It's in Norfolk, which is just mostly fenlands. I have a great affection for Norwich. It's just this city in the middle of nothing. There's lakes and there's grass and there's nothing, and then there's this city. So I was aware there wasn't much in the way of opportunity there, right? So my brother had already moved to London. And I was like, I'm going to go to London, I'm going to go to London and find my fortune. It was like that.
Absolutely.
So I moved to London and I got a job selling paper. So I was literally like Tim in The Office, the character Tim in The Office. I was like this kid, fresh out of college, 18 years old now. This time had passed. I've been listening to every personal development thing I could. And Tony Robbins interviewed a guy called Robert Cialdini. Now, Robert Cialdini is a psychologist, like a legit psychologist. And his speciality, Anita, is persuasion and influence. And I loved that interview. Like, it stayed with me. You know how, like, you always hear something or you see something and it stays with you. This stayed with me. And I love the idea, because Robert Cialdini says at the beginning, he says, look, all my life I've been a patsy. People can manipulate me. And yet he ironically became a professor of persuasion, which I just think is brilliant. And I loved that. I thought, oh, that's amazing. Getting, the way you're able to get people to say yes to things. So I moved to London. I live with my brother. And then my brother, because he's so into personal development, he's just like, I'm now going to Australia to find my fortune. And I was like, bro, I've only just got to London.
Yeah, exactly.
So he went off to Australia to follow his dreams there. And I was like, oh, God, I'm in London. What am I going to do? So my parents had moved to just south of London. And my dad was working for a shopping channel that had just opened up called QVC, the shopping channel. Anyone, if you are in Italy, Germany, Japan, US, UK, much of the world know about these TV channels that are just selling stuff all day long, selling stuff. And you got somebody in there selling a face cream, a fake diamond, a chainsaw, whatever it is. Anyway, my dad was already working there. That's what they'd left to go to London. Why I'd left home, because they didn't want to take me out of school. So they moved to London and I stayed on in Norwich. So Dad already worked for QVC. He was one of the presenters. He's an actor by trade, and he got into TV presenting. So he was selling stuff on TV. And I thought, well, that looks kind of cool. I'm going to go and get myself a job at QVC. So I left my job selling stationery, and I was so into it, Anita. I was like, oh, I'm going to be the best stationery seller ever. Right? And I was pretty good at it. because I was putting into practice everything I'd learned, right? From persuasion, help. So I was selling lots and lots of paper, basically. But this job,
Brilliant.
Yeah, I was selling paper. That's my success story, right? And then I moved to QVC. I got a job at QVC, and they were very anti-nepotism. I was really worried that people would think I only got my job because of my dad, but actually they didn't give me the job straight away because of that. I had to apply again, and I had to wait, and they were tougher on me, and so. And they didn't want me thinking I was anyone special because my dad was one of the presenters, right? So I had a bit of a harder time. But I got into my job at QVC. I worked my way up until I became a producer. Now, I'm going to bring everyone to this now who's put up with this long story. I'm going to bring you to 2003. So it's 10 years after my life has been changed by Tony Robbins, right? 10 years after he's helped me with these tapes I'd listened to. And I always had this fantasy. One day, he'll be thanking me. One day, I'm going to be able to give back to him, and he will be thanking me. And I had no idea how that would happen. I had no freaking idea, Anita, right? I was like, I don't know, but I'm going to do something for him, and he will be thanking me, and that'll be the give back. Because I was a massive believer in that. I still am. It's like, I've got to give back, you know? I've got to help him. He's helped me. He doesn't even know me. This stranger has helped me more than anyone else had helped me at that point in my life, right? Which is part of the appeal, by the way, I think, of this industry of ours, right? Of the personal spiritual development industry is like,
definitely,
we're benevolent strangers, right? Like all our lives have been touched by someone. Somebody's watched one of your podcasts and their life's been touched, and it's like, you may not even know them. And I thought that was beautiful. So I had this fantasy of Tony Robbins thanking me because I returned the favour. So the years went past, me having my job at QVC. I worked my way up to the producer, which basically means I'm in charge of the show. I'm the big producer. I sit in a dark room with a headset microphone on, and I'm young, right? So I'm like 26, I think, at the time, 2003, 26 years old. I was one of the youngest producers at the time, and I was ambitious, and I got there through my personal development and all this. And I got a call one day from the liaison at QVC. I'd actually moved to becoming a freelance producer, which basically meant I just worked for not just QVC. I worked for a lot of shopping channels and infomercial companies. I got a call from my lady at QVC called Tina, and Tina rings me and she says, James, can you come in? This is 2003, 20 years ago. She says, James, could you come in? Because we'd like you to come and work on a show. We want you to do a shift. And I went, yeah, okay. Like we normally do. For my day rate of like, I don't know, 300 quid or something like that for the day. And I was like, yeah, sure, I'll take the shift. And she said, yeah, one of the shows, we've got this, guru coming in, selling his tape sets. And the first 3 shows, he's in for 4 shows, and the first 3 haven't sold that well. And I went, okay, that sounds cool. Who is it? And she says, Anthony Robbins. I'm like,
drop the mic.
Yeah, I'll be there, right? So I went to QVC for my shift, and I know I'm doing this hour-long show with Tony Robbins. He's going to be on TV on QVC for an hour selling his Get the Edge program, which is a great program. So like £125 product. So it's not cheap for a bunch of CDs. Like that's quite a big ask, actually. When most of the time we spend a tenner on a CD, it's like, you get 7 CDs and a book, £125 from this crazy big American. Anyway, I got into QVC. His first 3 shows had averaged £55,000 an hour, which is great by our standards.
Yeah,
right?
Definitely.
Great. But when you take off costs to make the goods, shipping them into stock, QVC have to take their cut. It's not a lot of money for poor Mr. Robbins. So they wanted him to do much, much better, And they knew that I was into self-development. They thought I might be the best producer for the job. I was like, you're damn right I am. And,
yeah, definitely.
Right, that's what I was thinking, right? So when you're working with a guest, when you know that a guest is coming in on QVC, Anita, they should be in the studio really 2 hours before their show to get ready, pick outfits, prep the product, right? And as the producer, much like you and I discuss, even me appearing on your podcast before I come on, I needed to discuss with Tony, like, how does the show work? What are we going to do? So I went into QVC thinking me and Tony Robbins were going to become the best friends in those 2 hours. We're going to be chatting and sitting and all this kind of thing. Anyway, Tony doesn't show up 2 hours before a show. Tony doesn't even show up an hour before the show. I did everything that I could as the producer of the show. And I had this, like, my heart is beating out of my chest. I am realizing that I'm about to work with my childhood hero, right? The person who had changed my life. I'm so nervous, excited about this. And all I'm wanting is to have this time with Tony so that we can have these fantasies about us being friends and everything. Anyway, but that fantasy changed really, really quickly, because with an hour left till the show, he still wasn't in the studio. 45 minutes left, still not there. Half an hour, still not there. Tony walked up in his Mercedes at quarter to the show, 15 minutes.
Wow.
So I'm up in the studio pacing around waiting for him to come and sit in his seat. All the lights are on, all the cameras are there, the camera operators are there, the man that whacks the lights is there. Everyone's there in the studio, and I'm waiting for Tony to come in. He comes in with 8 minutes left to go. And that's all the time I had with Tony, 8 minutes. And I was introduced to him as the producer of the show. We met, and so he was like, okay, so what's the plan? And I told him the plan for this show, what we were going to do different. And I only had 8 minutes to do it. So I got over my hero complex real quick, and I was just like, this is just a guy who needs to do better. And TV is not his natural environment. Looking at the camera is not his natural. His natural is looking out on an ocean of people, right? On like a sea of faces looking back at him. And so I knew he's in alien environment. He's not in normal territory for him. So I was like, you've got to get over yourself and help him. Help this man. So I had 8 minutes to do it. I did the best I could. I went down to the gallery where you sit when the show happens, and we were on for the hour-long show. The show rocked and rolled the way that I wanted it to. And at the end of the show, I looked at the scoreboard for how much money it had made. It had made £116,902, just under 17 grand. So we had more than doubled the average of the previous three shows. I was utterly thrilled.
Well done, James. Gosh, 8 minutes is not a long time.
It's not.
You had to make every second count, I'm sure.
Yeah, right. Well, put it into perspective. It's at least we have been talking for twice, maybe even three times the amount of time I had to talk to Tony. So I had to be real quick and really get it down to the essentials that would make the difference, right? The difference that makes the difference.
Absolutely.
And I realized Tony wasn't being Tony. In all the other three shows, he wasn't being himself. He was being what he thought he should be when he's on telly. And that was the interesting thing that I noticed. When I look back at the three shows, what I saw was a Tony Robbins who was sort of being interviewed, a bit like on a morning breakfast show. He was being interviewed and he was sort of talking about the product, and they were sat down in chairs, and I was like, this isn't Tony. This isn't Tony, right? That's not Tony. Tony Robbins stands up when he's talking, and he's he's energetic and everything. So that I made a few changes to the last show that really meant that he could be him, and I think that's what made the difference. I know that's what made the difference.
Absolutely, and it's recognizing that.
I think there's so many people that probably maybe would be watching this that would do the same. That I would say apply the same to self. Is like, how are you when you're trying to be a certain way, actually not being you? You're kind of putting on a mask and being what you think you ought to be when you're on camera. And oftentimes when I ask people this, who are struggling with video or aren't feeling comfortable with it, or even just getting their message out there, like the way we're talking on a podcast interview or YouTube, wherever it might be, and they're like, yeah, I don't feel like I'm being me. And it's almost universal. it's very few people that actually feel completely comfortable on camera, because it's not a natural thing. Like if you were looking out my window now, looking in on me, you'd go, that looks weird. That looks like a human being interacting with another human, but they're not. They're talking to a little black round bit of glass, the little lens here that we can see. And it's like, I'm here in a room on my own. That's weird. And you're in a room on your own talking to me. It's really weird. And so it's no wonder people have challenges with it, Anita. And after working with Tony, QVC started getting in a couple of other big names. One of them was another hero of mine, Wayne Dyer. So I got to work with Wayne Dyer as well before he passed, which was just magical. And I got to work with people like Paul McKenna for several years. And what I found was I had a particular talent for helping self-help gurus, personal, professional development, spiritual development gurus, to just be themselves more.
That's brilliant.
And be able to connect with an audience more. And so in 2000, now we're going to 2004, end of 2004, I came online. So this was just over a year after I'd worked with Tony. That was when I took the courageous leap to fully leave shopping telly, leave the infomercial world, and go, do you know what? And that was that tugging I was talking about that I bet you so many of our viewers have got, is like people that have got a calling in them.
Definitely.
Like, it requires some courage. Like, I answered that in 2004. I came online, I left that world, and I was like, look, if I can help Tony, what more? Firstly, you've repaid the favor that he did you.
But like, you've done what you set out to do.
I did what I set out to do, and that was a weird feeling, because I was like, okay, well, what next? Like, there has to be something bigger that I can do with this. And I was like, look, if you can help freaking Tony Robbins and Wayne Dyer do better, you can help that new coach, that coach, healer, speaker, author, who is maybe in the first 5-10 years of their business, who is just maybe meeting some of those struggles that we all get, to connect with their audience. That's why I always say, it's not, when I talk about selling from the screen, when I help people to, get their message out there, I'm talking about the business of connection. The business, something that I really admire you for, Anita, is like the business of being real.
Thank you.
Well, I bet you've surely had your own journey with like how you be yourself, say, in this environment, right? What's that been like for you?
It's been pretty good. I think I love what I do. I love interviewing people. So it's been absolutely wonderful. I love connecting with people. I'm a people person. So I think I'm naturally gravitated.
Yeah.
Because I'm still being my normal self. I love talking to people. I want to hear stories. And this is the ideal environment to do it in.
Yeah. Well, that's a great call, just answering the call, right? Like answering the call in the way that feels real. And it's so many people. I hope people pay close attention to what you just said there, because it's like, you're so real. We've met, although it's been a few years, we've met in persons many, many times, and we've met in a sort of a more staged environment like this. And it's like, well, you are now who you are when the cameras aren't running, when there's no
Thank you, James.
around. No, but it's important, right? And I think a lot of people, it's one thing for me to tell this grandiose story about, helping Tony Robbins, but I think people there are so many people that delay doing like what you're doing, getting a message out there, sharing, because they're worried about who they are and who they're being. And it's like, no, it's not about trying to add on stuff, right? Like it's like shedding all of that. Actually, it's an unearthing. It's a taking off of the mask, not putting on the mask.
Definitely, James. Couldn't agree with you more. Absolutely.
So that's what I've been doing ever since. That's all I've been doing ever since. So since late 2004, I came online. I started my business. I've been coaching people, running group programs, running events, all not just helping people on video, but helping people to connect via who they really are. And there's a lot more involved in that than just going, just be yourself. Because a lot of people, you say, just be yourself, they don't even know what that means, right? They're like, I don't know, but I don't know what that means.
Absolutely. What is that? Absolutely. And that nicely goes on to my next question, which is, you're known as the lazy coach. What does that entail? You being you?
Yeah. Well, that might have been even when we met. The very first that I did a talk in 2010, which was when you and I met. And I did a talk for a friend about how I was running online courses and online group coaching programs way before a lot of my contemporaries. Not out of brilliance and inspiration, by the way. It was out of desperation, because I started my business at around the same time that my children were born. And at the time when I first started, I was doing what many of you will be doing, which is one-to-one sessions, right? So I was doing one-to-one coaching, and it was taking up my whole day. It was taking up my whole life. And if I wasn't doing coaching, I was trying to get coaching clients and then doing all the other things that business requires. And I had no time for my new children, no time for my new family. And it was quite disastrous. It was really quite disastrous. I remember one day being on a coaching call, and my daughter, Charlotte, who's now 17, but at the time was barely a year old. This would have been 2006, barely a year old. She tried to come in to see me one day because I worked from home, did coaching. I left corporate, and I was like, I'm going to be a stay-at-home coach, you know. And one day she tried to come in to see me while I was on a coaching call, and I literally slammed the door in her face. She wasn't even a year old.
Gosh.
And that still hurts. I'll be honest with you, that still hurts, because I was like, sometimes the very things we do to try and achieve something are the very things that mean that we don't achieve it. So I was doing all this coaching at home to try and be at home. But I wasn't there. I wasn't present.
Exactly.
I wasn't freaking there, man. And so I that moment changed everything, because I was like, that's bad. So I was like, look, there must be a way that I can sort of coach groups rather than just individuals. There must be a way, because even though everyone's different, people had similar challenges. And oftentimes I'd find myself giving similar advice to different clients. I'd be like, man, what has just taken me 8 hours, if I'd have got those 8 clients together, I could have done it in an hour. And
absolutely.
Right. So I went, I've got to run groups. I've got to start doing groups. But this is 2006. The internet, Facebook was becoming a thing slowly. I think that was mainly in 2007 onwards. YouTube was about a year old. The internet was not what it was today, but I knew that there was something about the internet that would let me do this. So I figured it out. There weren't any trainers or anyone back then to help. So I figured it out. I figured out how to do groups. And I figured out how to get 12, 20, 30, even more than that, people in like a massive group room. And you would help one person, and the impact would help everybody else. You'd help one person. And everybody else would go, oh, my God, I so needed to hear that. I so needed to hear that. You get this amazing group evolution. It was just amazing. And even though I was helping people with their businesses and their visibility, I was helping them with who they saw themselves as, really. That's all I've ever done. People say, oh, you're a marketing coach, you're a business coach. What the hell are you, James? It's like, I'm helping.
You're James.
Yeah, right. And I'm like, I'm just helping people see themselves, right? And be themselves, in a way that feels good for them, feels good for their clients, and everyone's helped by it. So I did these group programs, Anita, and people loved it. And I started doing these courses because I'd record the group programs and then I'd just sell the recordings. And so I was doing really well, and I had loads more time available. I was spending time with my kids, and I was like, this is great. And then my friend Dan Bradbury, shout out to Dan, my friend Dan Bradbury said, well, do you want to come and talk about this weird business model of yours? Because doing courses wasn't a thing then. So I went and did the talk. And the way he introduced me, he said, this is like the ultimate lazy way to do well in our industry. And I was like, oh, lazy. And one of my favorite books, one of my first business books, Anita, is a book called The Lazy Man's Way to Riches by Joe Carbo. It was written in the 50s. And I was like, the lazy coach way.
Yeah.
It just came on the journey back home after that talk that you were at, where we met in the car on the way back home after that talk. I was like, the lazy coach way. That sounds kind of cool. All right, let's go with it. And all I was doing was what I did with Tony Robbins, right? It's like my life had been changed, saved almost, by doing group programs, by doing powerful rites of passage for people that lift them, right? That change them in ways that mean they don't go back to their old, doubting ways and stuff like that. And they see themselves as these bright lights that they are, as these beacons to the world. Because everyone I'm working with is an author, they're a speaker, they're a healer, they're a trainer, they're a coach. There's somebody who has something, a great message to bring, like you, right? A great message to bring to the world, podcasters. And what gets in the way of that is seeing yourself differently, like seeing yourself less than you are. And
definitely.
So I was doing these group programs. They were so powerful. And I was like, man, I got to teach other people how to do group programs. And that's how the Lazy Coach Way came to be. So I started teaching people, here's how you reach groups, and here's how you work with groups in deeply powerful ways. And lazy, because I think this probably describes you quite well. I think often people hear the word lazy and they think it's bad. The way I always saw lazy was when someone is effortlessly doing what they're made to do. There's an effortlessness about them. There's an ease about them. They're not these kind of uptight, like, oh my God, I haven't done this yet. And I haven't, you know it when you meet someone who just seems to be, you are doing what you are made to do. And to those people, I always say, like, things, they don't come easy, but things are simple for them because they know what they're here to do and they do it. It doesn't mean they're always multi-millionaires, but it does mean that they are always on path. They know they're on path. And I call that lazy. It's a form of efficiency. They don't get caught up in the same dramas that everyone else does. They don't seem to get caught up in the same, I got to hustle and grind, I got to hustle. And they're not always struggling and have blame and excuses for it. And from the outside world, they look lazy. They look lazy, but they're not. They're on path and they're not wasting their energy on drama. That's lazy to me.
Absolutely love it, James. Love it.
Thank you.
You are the maker's guru. Explain that, James.
Guru maker.
Yeah, actually.
Yeah, the guru maker. Well, that's an easy one. I ran a program in 2008, and it was my first really successful group program, and it was called Guru Maker. And I found that word it disgusts some people, it makes other people curious, it makes some people inspired. We have a very weird relationship with the word guru. There have been some people in history who have abused the trust that comes with being a teacher, with being a guru. There are some people who we look up to and we revere for being gurus. I don't use the word guru in the same way. You don't need a beard and a white robe to be a guru. To me, becoming the guru that is inside you is about following your true path and allowing yourself to be a beacon to others for being on your path. And sometimes that means other people will want to follow you and they will look up to your example and they will admire it. And I'm not about bowing and scraping and everyone being a follower. What I'm about is, if you have something meaningful to say to the world, to bring to the world, if you have something real and meaningful that is yours, that is something in you. Again, like the story you shared in your very first episode here, it's like, man, oh man, it gives me goosebumps, right? Because it's like, that's you. I think
Thank you.
like that's your guru self, right? That's you got something really meaningful to share there about courage, about responsibility, about stepping up.
Mm-hmm.
And I always think when somebody is just in perfect alignment with that, that's guru to me. And it becomes the very way that you're being when you're doing that becomes a beacon, becomes a teacher to others around you. And I think that's the best type of guru that any of us can hope to become. And it's the kind of guru that I make. It's the kind of guru that I develop. It's that when people come to me, it's people with a light in them. It's people with a voice. People who have something to say, Anita, like you, like so many of the people that I've worked with over the years. And it's just when what I'm doing is I'm developing that light, helping it not become corrupted, helping it not become something that could hurt others, but ensuring that it's something powerful and good. And I think in that way, this industry of ours becomes the closest thing to magic that you have in this world. I really mean that. I know it sounds a bit dramatic, but I really mean that. This industry of ours is a beautiful industry. And so
definitely,
so
really
I definitely
is.
call myself, it is, isn't it? And so when I call myself the Guru Maker, it's because I saw back in 2008 in the very first Guru Maker program that I ran, that was the yearning in so many of my clients. They didn't quite have the language for it except that word. And I remember way back, this is January 2008, and I had a whole bunch of clients that had done some work with me in another group. And then I said, look, I'm going to do a group, and I was asking them, I was like going, what is it? Why are you doing this? And they all were like, I want to be a guru. Like, I want to share my message. I want it to make a difference to people. I want it to help others. I want to do well out of that if I can. I want to, and I was like, well, let's have an honest conversation about that across 6 weeks. And I created a 6-week program, which still runs to this day. So I think when I'm making gurus, I'm doing nothing else more than helping develop leading lights by getting them connected to who they are, getting them connected to who they really are, the meaningful message they have to bring to the world. It's not about long beards and people worshipping at your feet or anything like that. It's about doing that meaningful thing, as you always talk about, Anita, stepping up to that calling. So many people don't answer that call the way you have. And I think that's the problem that I want to try and do my bit around, is like, man, oh man, there's so many people that if they did share their message, if they did do it meaningfully, if they did do it from a real place, from an authentic place, from an aligned place, man, oh man, how much better would the world become every single day upon day if there were more people, as I think there are, speaking out, sharing their love, their wisdom, their warnings, their lessons, with the world. In that way, I think our industry has gone from the pop psychology kind of little side thing that it was when I first got into it, right, 30, 40 years ago, when many of us got into it, to now where it is becoming a force in the world.
Yeah, it's powerful.
It is, right? You think how many big names there were even 30 years ago when I discovered Tony Robbins. There weren't that many. There was like 100. There was like 50. Right? And you could name them. You can go like, okay, Deepak Chopra, Wayne Dyer, Tony Robbins. They're all like, half of them were all men as well. Like, there was no diversity or anything. Yeah. It's right. Like poor old Les Brown. It's just like there was Simon and Schuster and Nightingale Conant, who I got to work with. Were like the two publishing companies that had all the names, and there weren't many of them. Now with the internet, it's opened it up. It's made it a more even playing field where anyone can now share their message. Where 30 years ago, you had to be signed up with Hay House, Schuster, Nightingale, Conant. That was it. Nowadays, any of us can do it. And I'm like, so now is the time. Now is the time to start developing your voice like you're doing, creating your platform. You've done it. I mean, listen, you're the shining example of it here, right? It's like create your platform and practice your trade. Like start to share. You won't get it right first time, right? It will be messy. It will be embarrassing, but like you start something, and then down the line, it can be months, maybe it can be years, but sooner or later, you will get to a place where you wake up one day and you go, I never even imagined that this could be my waking reality, where I'm moving people, I'm making money, I'm like my needs are taken care of, and I'm helping other people look after themselves. It's a wonderful industry. I love it, and with every passing year, I become more and more passionate about it.
Absolutely, and that brings me on to my next question. Beautifully, what has been your biggest learning in the industry, in your business?
Oh, my biggest learning is there is no real difference between the big, famous, rich names you look up to and you. It can seem like they are better or more enlightened, or, they drive fancy cars and fly around in private jets. And truly, that early experience of working with Tony Robbins and Wayne Dyer, listen, it's 20 years ago now. It's a long time ago. It's a one-off experience. But it planted a seed in me. And that seed of thought was, this is just a guy. The guy that walked into the studio to do that show with me as the producer was in an alien environment. He was probably feeling as out of his element as many of you will be feeling when you're thinking, oh God, I'm going to do my first Facebook Live, or I'm going to go on TikTok, or I'm going to do my first podcast, right? It's like I got to see a side of the gurus by working with them early on in my career. That was a blessing. And what I saw was their humanity, their failings, their averages. I got to see the areas where they weren't necessarily, where there was vulnerabilities.
Yeah, definitely.
And what I realized is they're people, right? Like they're people, just like you.
Yeah.
And it could be so easy when you're listening to them every day and you're filling your head with their wisdom to kind of, what would you call it? Like bypass yourself, like give up your own sense of strength, that you're a source as well, because you're listening to other people who seem to have all the wisdom. And I'm like, sometimes the very first thing I recommend in my program, especially my Guru Maker program, is like, take a fast, right? We have breakfast where we have 8, 9, 10 hours off to sleep and to rest and all this. And I'm like, take some time off. I'm a huge believer in listening to great, inspiring things and things that motivate you. But there's a point when you're trying to access yours, you've got to take a fast from that. You've got to stop listening to without and not start listening within. And what I've learned, my biggest learning is there is no difference. There is no difference between the coach, the healer, fresh out of coaching and healing school, who's got a shiny certificate and wants to make a difference to the world. And there is no difference other than certain assumptions. And those people who are wildly successful, they didn't wait for the big finger to come down from the cloud and go, it's your time, you go now, here's your permission, right? They didn't wait. They went for it. And that's almost the only difference. People say, yeah, but they're so confident. I go, well, not in my experience. In my experience, I've gone on to work with a lot of leading lights in this industry after those early instances. And I find, listen, many of the gurus, they doubt themselves more than you do. But it's when they doubt themselves. They'll doubt themselves after they do it anyway. They stop to doubt when they've done it. Right? Just like you did with the podcast, right? It's like, okay, I'll doubt it later. Let me just do it now and I'll doubt it later. And it's...
Exactly.
Yeah, right? And I'm like, there's no difference. They're just a great example of what can happen if you stay true to your path. That's my biggest learning, Anita.
That's brilliant, James, and thank you for sharing that. It's really a brilliant way of putting it. Absolutely love it.
Yeah.
So
Thank
what resources do you recommend, daily tools, tips to anyone that wants to start sharing their meaningful message to the world?
you. Yeah. Okay, so do what Anita and me have done is buy yourself a microphone.
Yeah. And get on with it.
Yeah, get on with it. No, the wonderful thing is, like nowadays, we all have in our pockets the broadcast studio, the platform to be able to do everything. This,
Yeah.
even when I started out, this wasn't possible. Now it is. So I would say you're lucky. Now, I know when I say it like that, I sound like a parent going, "Oh, you don't know how lucky you've got it."
Yeah.
What I would say is, in terms of resources, a decent notepad and a pen. Here's why. There'll be things that come up, questions you hear, challenges you hear people have, and you'll go, and it will nag at you. I always say, pay attention to those annoying nags, the things that you always go, "Oh, why do people think this way? Or why do people do these things?" And like, start writing them down. Start writing down, start documenting your wisdom, not other people's wisdom, not other stuff you did in a training course with somebody else. That's somebody else's stuff. Your stuff will always come up. You'll start to see your own wisdom in other people's frustrations, right? And it's like, you've got to start documenting it. Because I think the one thing that everyone needs who wants to get started is references. And so if you don't have them, if you don't have a book you can go to and go, "These are my thoughts. This is what I think about this. This is what I genuinely believe about this," then you're kind of, you've got no foundation under you. Start telling stories. Most of our conversation, which I hope viewers have found at least interesting to some degree, most of mine and the conversations has been stories. Most of the interviews you've done here on this wonderful podcast of yours is stories, is other people sharing their stories. And the get in touch with your stories. So start documenting the ideas that you get, not for products and programs, but just answers to people's frustrations that always come up for you. And you're like, "Oh God, why do people think this way?" Or, "Oh, it's so annoying. People don't understand this." And start with frustrations and annoyances, because you'll start to see what solutions to problems, other people's problems. And then, so it's solutions first, and then it's stories. So start to look at your own, how you can start to use things that happen to you to help others. So what I hope I've done with my stories is show you, for example, that those other people aren't more special than you. That's what I hope with all my heart, that my story has helped you to see. And if it has done that at any degree, then my story has helped, right? My story has helped you. And so you've got to start finding your stories. And I always invite people, Anita, to sort of look at their stories like they're a tough Hollywood editor. Like, you can't take it personally. You've got to realize, like the stories I've told you today, they feature me, right? They've got me in them, but they're not really about me. They're about you. They're about the people watching this. There's something in here that you'll see for yourself. So you've got to start finding those stories. And then what I would say is the next thing you'll find is structures. And that'll come a little further down the line, but you'll start to see that there's patterns, especially those of you that are already working with clients or speaking to audiences. You'll notice patterns in the way that people come to you with their problems or present themselves, and you'll see that there's patterns. And so out of that, you'll find a structure to help people through those patterns. So just like I have structures for somebody that doesn't know what to say on camera, when they get on camera, I can go, "Okay, well, not a script, right? A script is just, I'm just saying the words that are written and I'm not really feeling them." A structure just guides you. It's like the banks of a river, right? Without banks of a river, it's just a still lake, but we want to be moving. So I always think of structures as helping hold you and guide you. And so you want to start paying attention to structures that you can put in place to help people who keep coming back or who keep showing up with certain patterns of behavior or patterns of problem. You do that, and you got, honestly, put your mobile phone on, put your camera on, and start just talking about these things, and you'll do just fine.
Absolutely, James. Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I cannot let this episode go by without saying, and you recently got married. Big congratulations, James.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And I've seen it, the photos and your lovely wife, and it's beautiful, and all the children on social media. So that was really lovely. Thank you for sharing all that.
You're very welcome. It's that has been another massive lesson in trust. We talked about at the beginning about how I feel anyway, that courage and trust are great bedfellows. And, there was a degree of courage. I'm not a young man anymore, even though thankfully this software makes me look it. So I've come to marriage later, as somebody in my sort of now late 40s. And, we talk about patterns. Like, I had patterns of who I was, and I had patterns about who I thought I was, what I thought I would do. And it takes courage to me and trust, but it took courage to be willing to question my own patterns and my own ideas about who I was.
Definitely.
And then to trust that there could be such a bigger adventure on the other side of marriage. And I'm so glad that I had that courage and took that trust.
Oh, absolutely. And that's so beautifully put as well. Thank you, James.
Oh, you're welcome. Cheers.
Brilliant. So where can the listeners find you online? What's your website?
Yeah, sure. If people want to check me out, you can go to lazycoach.com, all one word, lazycoach.com. And there you'll see it's the home. It's where real gurus are made. So if you want to come along and you want to start developing your voice, or maybe you're already quite well established. Maybe you're already like Anita. You've got a platform. You're starting to get your message out there in the world, but you're maybe hitting glass ceiling, right? So your sort of progress has gotten slower and slower, or you feel like you're walking through treacle with so much to do. I think you'll find a lot of resources there. So come and connect with me there. Best thing to do is jump on the list and make friends with me on Facebook. And because I'm a believer, I don't look up to gurus. I don't go like, oh, we must worship the. I hope that I conduct myself like that as well. So if anyone wants to talk to me or ask me anything, just talk to me. There's no gatekeepers, there's no waiting list or anything like that. Just connect with me on Facebook. It's the easiest way to talk to me.
And James, you are very approachable. So anybody listening, do go ahead and connect with James.
Thank you so much, Anita.
Thank you for sharing your insightful wisdom and knowledge with us today. And by doing so, James, I know you've helped so many others. James Deneka-Lavers. We are all about create the courage to be fearless, as we've been talking about. So, James, my final question to you is, what is your definition of courage?
My definition of courage is the capacity to trust in the path of your life. So courage isn't like a light switch. It's not on or off. It's a capacity. I think it's something that can moment to moment be expanded, like your breath can be expanded, and it is our capacity to trust our path and who we are.